Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Alberta Health Minister Jason Copping announced a proposal of historic new funding for healthcare here in our province. We hear from a lawyer who gives us her thoughts on the Justice Rouleau report, which said Ottawa had every right to invoke the Emergencies Act last winter. And a local theatre company gives us an update on their Save the Stage campaign, a fundraiser to help them keep their doors open.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says her government has more plans for investing in recovery-oriented care. She shared the details at the 6th Annual Recovery Capital Conference taking place right now in Calgary. Smith says more work needs to be done to help Albertans who are struggling with addictions issues.
We set out with an initial commitment to spend $140 million over 4 years to address the addiction crisis taking place here in Alberta. And with that funding, our initial goal was to support an additional 4,000 Albertans every year to access detox treatment and recovery by funding more beds across the province. Now, 4 years later, we're partnering with organizations across Alberta, and we're supporting over 10,000 more Albertans every year with barrier-free access to these services. Next, we eliminated all user fees for publicly funded addiction treatment. It was a massive step forward because under previous governments, Albertans had to pay $40 a day to access publicly funded treatment beds.
Alberta Health Minister Jason Copping discussed how the province is unveiling more investments in our primary healthcare system. Copping says the proposed historic funding will give Albertans access to healthcare when and where they need it the most. He says our focus needs to shift more to primary and preventative medicine.
I'm announcing that if passed, Budget 2023 would invest over $2 billion this year alone, the highest ever in Alberta's history, to improve primary healthcare. If you look at the next 3 years, we will have more than $240 million in new funding. This would include $125 million to implement recommendations coming from these MAPS panels, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. $40 million to support primary care networks, which follows through on our commitment made in the AMA deal signed last fall, and $27 million to PCNs to provide for an expected increase of patients attached to a primary care provider. In addition, there is $12 million to help community-based physicians with IT systems that will help enhance continuity of care for patients.
The province also announced that it is working with post-secondary institutions to address gender-based violence and help keep campus communities safer. In February of this year, Advanced Education provided $2.5 million to colleges and universities to train staff and students to stand up to gender-based violence. The funding also provided a province-wide survey collecting data from students on the issue. Students have until February 28th to submit their responses. The final report with the results from the survey will be released in July. You know, many Canadians are reacting to Justice Paul Rouleau's report, which said that the federal government was justified in invoking the Emergencies Act last winter. Now, to chat about this in more detail is one of the lawyers who represented Freedom Convoy protesters in Ottawa, Eva Chipiuk. She joins us now from Edmonton. Eva, what were some of your thoughts on Justice Rouleau's report?
One thing I'm going to mention right off the bat is Justice Rouleau said that this was meant to be a transparent process so that Canadians can hear the truth. And we were there as counsel for 6 weeks at the commission. And let me just give Canadians a little understanding of how transparent the report itself came out. The media only in Ottawa had over 2 hours with that report, and we as counsel for the protesters that, let me remind you, have been vilified in the news, have been charged with criminal charges. We didn't have an opportunity to even see the report until well after the media only in Ottawa had a chance to see it. So that's how I feel about the report right now. I feel that we really lost the opportunity to be transparent, as Mr. Rouleau said on the first day, for Canadians to know the truth, because even how the report itself came out was incredibly untransparent.
Now, do you think this report, which says the Trudeau government was justified in invoking the act, will maybe see more lawsuits by Ottawa citizens against protesters with the Freedom Convoy?
So there's the $400 million class action against protesters in Ottawa. And I think, yes, this is going to add some fuel to that fire. So in return, I think we're going to need to buckle up and get a little bit more busy with that. I think that's where we're really losing the plot here, unfortunately, is that this, based on the evidence, as opposed to what was said in the media, the evidence showed that there was absolutely no reason to justify it. So the fact that Mr. Rouleau went so far to say that, I have serious problems with still to this day. It wasn't his role. That would be the role of the judge in the judicial review, which is coming up in April, to make.
Now, Justice Rouleau allegedly said there were some missteps taken during the protests last winter, and he says he would like to see the Emergencies Act amended. What would that amendment potentially look like?
He said that the amendments need to make it so that it's easier to invoke the act. So this is a serious concern for Canadians. And what I want to remind Canadians, though, is this is a stroke of a pen. And with a change in government, same stroke of a pen can change the results. So and I'm not telling anybody how to vote, but the thing is, ask elected officials what their thoughts are about amending the Emergencies Act so it's easier for government to take away your civil liberties.
Thanks so much, Eva. That was Freedom Convoy lawyer Eva Chipiuk joining us from Edmonton. Well, it turns out Ms. Chipiuk isn't the only one who's taken issue with Justice Rouleau's report. Toronto Sun columnist and political reporter Brian Lilley says there should be strict definitions surrounding the Emergencies Act instead of making it easier for the federal government to simply invoke it anytime it chooses to do so.
The Emergencies Act should not be easy to invoke. It grants the government extraordinary powers. It suspend civil liberties. It should be hard, and there should be strict definitions. And I think that the framers of this bill from the 1980s and the Mulroney government, with assistance, by the way, from the opposition parties of today, I think they did a good job. The Trudeau government muddied the waters here with their interpretation of it. I don't want to see them muddy the waters by amending it, so I'm worried that that may happen.
Make sure you catch the entire interview with political reporter Brian Lilley and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up after Business News. A parliamentary committee has recommended that assisted dying laws should be expanded to include minors. Now, the Special Joint Committee of MPs and Senators said that minors deemed to have the appropriate decision-making capacity should be eligible for medical assistance in dying. Ottawa tabled legislation to delay an expansion of Canada's MAID law until 2024. Potentially including kids in MAID is a big concern for many Canadians. Now, when Mike Shouten's son received a terminal cancer diagnosis, the last thing they thought about was assisted suicide for his boy. Shouten says they were very thankful for the help his son received in the world of pediatric palliative care.
Our son Marcus endured cancer, incredible suffering. He essentially drowned to death as his lungs filled with tumors. But we were also the benefactors of an incredible hospice and palliative care system in our country that, especially when dealing with children, is so dedicated on ensuring that no matter how long a child's life is, they're going to do their best to ensure that every day is lived well.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Mike Shouten and David Craig from Return to Reason on the RTR website or on their YouTube channel. Governor General Mary Simon joined Ukraine's ambassador to Canada, marking the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The somber event was organized by a variety of groups, including the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and the Friends of Ukraine diplomatic group.
You were with us from the very first day of declaration of Ukraine independence in 1991, and now when we are fighting for our sovereignty and protecting democracy. Today, we also mark the day of the Heavenly 100, the day when 100 Ukrainians lost their lives 9 years ago in Maidan Square in Kyiv with the strive for our European future. Due to their sacrifice and the sacrifice of many brave Ukrainians these days on the battlefield, today Ukraine is a candidate of EU member. and a proud member of EU family.
The winter storm warning continued for much of our region again today. We've seen quite a bit of snow and much colder temperatures across much of southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, we had to ensure that those block heaters are working for it looks like a deep freeze is arriving fairly soon.
Yeah, well, I'd say we're pretty much almost there when you consider our overnight temperature this evening, which is a low of minus 23. Now, keep in mind, it's going to be feeling more like a minus 33 this evening. And then as we get into Wednesday, still looking at periods of snow, also seeing more snow this evening as well, up to 2 centimeters. More snow as well on Wednesday, and it's going to get even chillier for our daytime high, which is minus 22. Going to be feeling much chillier than that with the wind chill. So definitely bundle up, grab those cords to plug in your car because it's about to get even colder, and I'll have all those details coming up for you later in the show.
Plug in indeed. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Snow removal is well underway in Lethbridge, and to ensure snow plowing can move forward without any issues, temporary parking restrictions are now in effect along major snow routes. Officials with the city said Phase 1 snow plowing in residential areas will begin on Wednesday with the potential for ticketing of vehicles.
The ticketing will be done on anybody that is parked after the snow route is declared and before the snowplow gets there, because it's impeding the vehicle, impeding the operation. And so our ticketing operation will come in after the snow plowing is done and ticketing those vehicles that are affecting our snow and ice control operation.
The measures will remain in place until the city announces snow routes are no longer active and you can go and park your vehicle again. Lethbridge Mayor Blaine Hagan brought forward an official business motion to City Council on Tuesday, asking members to vote to have him send letters to the province and federal government asking for funding for a functional planning study and a preliminary design for a proposed third bridge here for our city. It would be located across the Chinook Trail River crossing. Council voted 5-3 in favor of Hagan's motion.
I know that there's funding that is available, not that we're going to get it with how prosperous lately with some of these cash flows from, the surpluses that have come from a provincial point of view. And so I'm going to be going up to the budget here next week. I do want to take this in hand up to, in person and deliver this. And it's not that they're going to turn around and give the dollars right now. We know that this is going to take some time, but it just gets it on the table of those that we hoped will have the funding available.
During the last Lethbridge municipal election, just over 60% of voters said that they would like our city to construct a third bridge before the year 2030. And last year, City of Lethbridge said that proposed cost for a bridge along the Chinook Trail River crossing would have an estimated value of $190 million. A 29-year-old man is in custody following what Lethbridge police say was a domestic assault which took place over the weekend. The incident occurred in the 600 block of Florence Ho Long Crescent North on Sunday afternoon. A female victim who was attacked is in Chinook Regional Hospital recovering from her injuries. The suspect faces a wide range of charges, including assault with a weapon, sexual assault, unlawful confinement, and choking to overcome resistance. New West Theatre has provided a wide variety of theatrical and musical shows over the past 30 years here in Lethbridge. Now, last year, the organization said that they were in trouble financially and had to fundraise around $150,000 to be able to stay afloat. Kelly Ray, the artistic director for New West, says they have completed Phase 1 of the Save Our Stage fundraising campaign and now we're headed into Phase 2.
Yeah, we're really thrilled with how the campaign is going. Phase 1 completed at the end of December, and we met our goal of $35,000 for that first phase. And Phase 2 launched on January 1st, and we're right in the middle of that phase. And the goal for that phase is $65,000, and we're really pleased to report that we are just over $27,000 raised in Phase 2 of the campaign for a grand total of $62,000 so far. And, with our outside goal being $150,000 by the end of the calendar year.
New West Theatre is an upcoming show called Nightlife, with proceeds going to Phase 2 of the Save Our Stage fundraiser. According to industry experts, the Last of Us television series will generate over $200 million in revenue for Alberta. The show was shot entirely in our province and has showcased the Alberta Legislature, the Lethbridge High-Level Bridge, and the historic Fort Macleod downtown area. A University of Lethbridge alumna, Lindsay Kapitsky, was able to work hands-on during the making of the show as a costume buyer for the actors. She explained the interesting things she did to make each character shine.
I would meet with the design team and we would kind of discuss the script and the characters that were involved and things like that, and how we wanted to bring them to life through their wardrobe. The design team had a lot of access to the concept art from the game, so we were able to pull from that heavily, which was very valuable to us. And then once we kind of had discussed the characters and things like that, the design team would kind of give us a list of things that they were looking for. And then me and the rest of the buying team would go out into Calgary to source whatever we could locally. Obviously, there would be some things that we would need to buy internationally and source online.
Kapitsky says the film industry is really booming here in Alberta, and she's hoping to have additional chances to highlight her talent in the future. A Christian revival is taking place at Asbury University in Kentucky. It's apparently been going on for about 12 days. As we hear in this next report, thousands of people are allegedly traveling from all across the United States to join in this powerful movement of God.
This revival is officially in overflow mode. Look at this line behind me, about a half a mile long. Folks from all over the country waiting patiently to get into Hughes Auditorium here at Asbury University to experience this historic revival for themselves.
God is here. God is here, and He's working right now. Come get you some. You hear me?
Well, that's exactly. I was like,
29-year-old Joa Perez drove all the way from Florida to ask God a simple question.
I came here and I'm like, Lord, if you want me to go back to preaching, if you want me to plant this church that I've had in my heart and for years to plant, I need someone to prophesy over me right now.
Joa's prayer was answered when he ran into a well-known local preacher.
He prays over me, and he literally just declares what I've been praying for years over my life. And I thought that was insane.
Regent University! Yeah. Jeff Gossman with Regent University drove 10 hours from Virginia Beach after hearing about what God is doing here.
Well, everybody at Regent right now, including all the executive vice presidents, they're all crying out for revival. You know, they're having extra prayer services over there right now. They want the presence of the Lord on campus. And so we're just so thankful that they sent us here, you know, to just get whatever we can to bring back.
On Thursday, the persistent rains did not dampen spirits for those waiting to get inside.
You know, when I was saved, I got the Holy Spirit, but always looking for more and really hoping when I walk through the doors, it's poured out on me.
21-year-old student body president Allison Perfader was there when revival broke out.
Because you just didn't want to leave. It's not that anyone was saying, oh, let's see how long we can last. Let's see how, you know, like we just didn't want to go. And I came in, I had a lot of like anger issues. I like really struggled with my anger, and I was able to talk with like God first. And it's just like that never would have happened like on my own time.
It's been just a really hard couple of years. And not just for me, but like a lot of my friends. Yeah. And I just felt like the Lord was releasing me of a lot of bitterness and anger that I'd had just about all kinds of stuff, even some of it towards God. And so I would say for me personally, the biggest word I can use has been a very, very healing experience for me.
So how do you explain what's happening here at Asbury? I would just say there is a tangible presence of God's peace, joy, and a freedom to worship and adore the one true God.
So incredible to see. By the way, there are also reports that revivals are now taking place at 22 other colleges and universities across the United States. No word yet on if Canadian post-secondaries have experienced something similar. Well, we have been experiencing lots of snow here in southwestern Alberta. Environment Canada issued a winter storm warning for our region on Tuesday. The colder weather and snowy conditions should remain for a little while. Complete weather details are coming up. That was quite the welcome back from Old Man Winter as we headed back to work today. Lots of cold temperatures and snow across much of southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, we better be sure that those block heaters are working since we'll be needing them this week.
Yeah, they sure will be, Hal. So definitely dig out the old extensions cords and plug in the car because we are in a bit of a deep freeze here for at least the next few days. As we look into this evening, still another 2 centimeters of snow falling down. Into Wednesday, we're looking at more periods of snow, high of minus 22, going to be feeling more like minus 33, minus 34 with that wind chill. Minus 25 on Thursday. That's our really cold day this week, and that, of course, is our high. That's not even including the wind chill. Mainly cloudy skies that day, and then we get back into the sunshine. High of 13 degrees on Friday. Same thing for Saturday. Then we're going to have that warm-up period back up to the pluses for Sunday, high of 2 degrees. And then we're back to minus 3 on Monday. So we're kind of all over the place, definitely in a low period. Average high for this time of year, 2 degrees. Average low, minus 10. Not going to be anywhere near that, unfortunately, for the next several days. 16 was our high temperature back in 1973 and in 1957. It felt more like this week. The low was minus 26. Sun rose this morning at 7:31 a.m. Our sun set this evening at 5:59 p.m. So we're almost at 10 and a half hours. We're at 10 hours and 27 minutes of daylight. Okay, on the west coast, we are looking at 2 to 4 centimeters of snow with 30 to 50k winds in Victoria. 1 degree the high there. Temperature sitting steady at 0 in Vancouver, but with 60k winds in the southern portion of the city, and they're looking at 60% chance of flurries there as well. Minus 24, that is, in Edmonton. With the wind chill, they're going to feel more like minus 38, risk of frostbite. And same thing for Calgary, minus 23 the high, going to feel more like minus 36. We saw that big dump on Calgary. We're still going to be seeing periods of snow into Wednesday as well. Minus 26 the high in Saskatoon, but going to be feeling more like minus 42 with that wind chill. We could be seeing frostbite in minutes. Same thing for Regina, frostbite in minutes, feeling the minus 42 wind chill. Minus 23 is a high. And minus 3 the high in Winnipeg, but Winnipeg also feeling the wind chill, and same thing, risk of frostbite there as well. Toronto looking at a winter storm watch. As we get into Wednesday, we're seeing periods of light snow in the morning, heavier snow by the afternoon, and then by the evening looking at ice pellets and risk of freezing rain. 0 though the high, minus 6 the high in Ottawa, minus 4 in Montreal. Both of those cities seeing partly cloudy skies and just a 15k wind, not so bad at all. As we look to Atlantic Canada, Fredericton sitting at minus 1, 4 degrees the high in Halifax, lots of sunshine there. Sunny skies expected tomorrow in Charlottetown as well, with a high of 0. And St. John's, Newfoundland, with 10 centimeters of snow beginning in the morning, looking at 60k winds blowing snow in exposed areas. Temperatures sitting steady though at minus 4. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Stats Canada says the annual inflation rate slowed to 5.9% in January. This is despite grocery prices rising at an even faster pace last month. BMO Chief Economist Douglas Porter says the positive report is a step in the right direction, noting experts anticipate inflation to drop to around 3% by the summer. Meanwhile, grocery prices are still a sore spot for many Canadians, with prices up 11.4% compared to a year ago. Stats Canada says retail sales rose 0.5% to $62.1 billion in December. They were led by gains in motor vehicles and parts dealers. Overall, core retail sales, which exclude gas stations and motor vehicle and parts dealers, were up 0.4% in December. In volume terms, retail sales increased 1.3%. The federal agency's preliminary estimate for January suggests retail sales grew 0.7% as Canadian consumers continued spending in the new year. The former chief executive of Imperial Oil is now the new president and CEO of Suncor Energy. The Calgary-based company announced the appointment of Rich Kruger. He will officially take over on April the 3rd. He replaces Chris Smith, who was appointed interim CEO after Mark Little resigned last July amid investor pressure and a spate of workplace deaths. Kruger worked for ExxonMobil for 39 years and then led Imperial from 2013 to 2019 before retiring from the company. Now, here's a look at today's markets, which were mostly down on Tuesday. The TSX was down 262 points on the day to finish at 20,252. The Dow was down 697 points to 33,129. The S&P 500 was down 81 on the day to 39.97, and the Nasdaq was down 294 points to 11,492. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 18 cents to 76.16 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 21 cents to 207 US. Gold was down 3 cents to 1835.07 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 21.83 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12 per bushel, barley's at $9.14, canola's at $18.86, and corn is at $11.28 per bushel. Live cattle were up $1.18 to $164.75. Feeder cattle March contract was up 35 cents to $186.88, and lean hogs April contract was up $3.83 to $89.10. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.88 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta Health Minister Jason Copping discussed how the province is unveiling more investments in our primary healthcare system. Copping says the proposed historic $2 billion in healthcare funding for the budget will shift more money to primary and preventative medicine. He says that will include around $240 million more in extra funding. There's been a lot of reaction since Justice Paul Rouleau's report was released, which says the federal government was justified in invoking the Emergencies Act last winter. Political reporter Brian Lilly will give us his thoughts on the report shortly in an interview with BCN's Jeanette Roche. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Discover how Lethbridge has played an important military role in the preservation of world peace and security by visiting the Lethbridge Military Museum at the Vimy Ridge Armory at the Lethbridge Airport. The museum is open to the public each Wednesday from noon to 4 p.m. Special arrangements for other days and times can be made by calling 403-328-6196. Admission is free, but donations are gratefully accepted. For more information, visit lethbridgemilitarymuseum.org. Lethbridge Sport Council's Indoor Roving Gyms program takes place Tuesdays at Emmanuel Lutheran Church from 6 to 7 p.m. and Thursdays at the Service Sports Center from 10 to 11 a.m. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. Pre-registration is required and space is limited. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Could medical assistance in dying really be extended to minors? Plus, a judge deemed the Prime Minister as justified in invoking the Emergencies Act. To discuss these topics, plus a whole lot more, is our political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist, Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, so great to have you with us again.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Brian, medical assistance in dying, or MAID as it's known, continues to be a hot topic in Ottawa and, of course, everywhere. So last week, a report called for extending MAID to minors. And did this get the support of all parties?
No, it did not. The Conservatives issued a dissenting report saying they don't agree with the idea of extending it to minors. If you remember some of the hearings that have gone on over the past few months, there were doctors who showed up saying extend MAID to infants, to newborns. A lot of disturbing and very upsetting testimony coming from various groups. But the majority on this special committee of MPs and senators said, you know what, we should extend medical assistance in dying to minors. They don't want to put an age on it, but the minor in question should have mental competence to be able to make that decision on their own with independence. So, you know, it's very vague. I'm not sure how you even take that recommendation and put it forward into a policy that is easy to follow, but also to enforce, so that you're not turning around and saying, well, a 6-year-old, let's give them MAID because they asked for it. That's, you know, one concern. They did say, you know, there's been the discussion of extending medical assistance in dying to people with mental illness, people dealing with depression. They did say that, no, that shouldn't be the case with minors. With minors, it should be only if their death is reasonably foreseeable, which is kind of where we started at the beginning. You know, the argument for bringing in MAID was people who have terminal cancer, who are in, you know, excruciating pain towards their end of their lives. Shouldn't they be allowed to end it on their own terms with the assistance of a doctor? And that was put forward as the compassionate route. And of course, we've gone down a slippery slope that I don't think a lot of people expected. You know, some warned there was a slippery slope, but I think we've gone further than even what we were being warned about. And now this report. So this is going to create a lot more discussion, a lot more controversy, and a lot more questions about how you actually do it. It's so vague in my view that I'm not sure how you would.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Brian, another big news item. Justice Rouleau's report came out on Friday, finding the government was justified in invoking the Emergencies Act last year during the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. So the judge had some criticisms, though, of the government, and he said that he arrived at his conclusion reluctantly. So what did you make of that, Brian?
It sounded like he was giving them a pass, but barely. Reminded me of my grade 10 French teacher saying, look, if you promise not to come back next year, I'll give you a 51 and you can get the grade, but don't come back. It was that sort of thing. He said that he found the government's decision to invoke the act was justified, but that he arrived at that reluctantly. He added beyond that that the body of evidence before him was not overwhelming. You know, that's not a ringing endorsement of the government's conclusion. Now, how did he arrive at that? He also, by the way, said reasonable and informed people could easily have arrived at a different position, a different answer than he did. That's where I am. How did he do that, though? He accepted a lot of the government's positions put forward around how to interpret the Emergencies Act, how you had to apply the definition of what is or is not a national security threat. And the government said, well, we interpreted it differently than the law is written. I didn't buy that. I didn't think that was valid. If you remember, they had their own secret legal opinion that said that they were justified, that they wouldn't even share with the committee. I didn't think that was valid. Justice Rouleau did give them a pass on a lot of these things that I wouldn't have, that others wouldn't have. But you know, it's in the end, I'm not sure that even if he had found them not justified, that it would have changed much. I mean, there's no recourse from that. And I know some people wanted the prime minister to resign if he was found not justified. That's not how inquiries work, and that wouldn't have happened. It just would have been a black mark on his record and another tool for the opposition to go after him with.
Mm-hmm. Was that specifically what you were concerned about, that you wrote in one of your articles? You had some concerns about his recommendations to amend this act?
Yeah, so that whole issue of how you define a national emergency. So the Emergencies Act says that a national security emergency, which is what they called, needs to be national in scope. It needs to threaten the national security of the country as defined in Section 2 of the CSIS Act. The government took that to mean, or some people tried to say, well, that means CSIS has to decide if there's a national emergency. That's not the case. You just have to use the definition. The government said they're going to use a different definition, that they're going to use more inputs. Justice Rouleau said this is all too confusing, and in the future, you should take the definition out of the CSIS Act and amend the Emergencies Act. I worry that that will be used by the government to just water down how you define a national security incident where you can invoke this act. The Emergencies Act should not be easy to invoke. It grants the government extraordinary powers. It suspends civil liberties. It should be hard, and there should be strict definitions. And I think that the framers of this bill from the 1980s and the Mulroney government, with assistance, by the way, from the opposition parties of today, I think they did a good job. The Trudeau government muddied the waters here with their interpretation of it. I don't want to see them muddy the waters by amending it, so I'm worried that that may happen. Any amendment that says we'll take it out of CSIS Act and put it directly into the Emergencies Act, that has to be airtight. It can't leave room for wiggle room.
And then speaking of Rouleau, Brian, aren't there some strange claims that Justice Rouleau could be somehow related to Trudeau through marriage? Have these claims been substantiated?
They haven't. Look, I wrote about Justice Rouleau having liberal ties when he was first appointed last April. He is someone who, when he was a young man, worked for the Liberal Party and leader of the day, John Turner. John Turner ran for Liberal leadership. Justice Rouleau was part of his team. When he won the Liberal leadership and became Prime Minister, he helped pick his cabinet, worked in his office for several years, but then moved on, became a lawyer, became a judge. There's no record that he's even donated since he became a judge in what I think was 2002. But there have been these claims that Pierre Trudeau's sister married a guy named Paul Rouleau, and Pierre Rouleau, and that's Paul Rouleau's brother. Paul Rouleau, Justice Rouleau, doesn't have a brother named Pierre. Further to that, Justice Rouleau's about 70, maybe. Suzette Trudeau is Pierre Trudeau's older sister. She's long passed. She would have been about 109, I think. I'm just doing quick math in my head. That her husband was older than her. You're not going to have a brother that's 30, 40 years or more older than you. That just doesn't happen. And so, no, there is no family relationship there. That keeps being put out as some people trying to say why he arrived at his view, at his conclusion. That's not the case. I disagree with the report, but fight it using facts. Don't use it fighting falsehoods, because it doesn't help anybody.
Right. Good to put those claims to bed, that's for sure. Okay, on Friday, Prime Minister Trudeau not only responded to the Rouleau report, but he also had to respond to the new allegations that China interfered in our 2019 and 2021 elections. And Brian, he responded by not being outraged at China, but by wanting to expose the person who blew the whistle on this. So what did this surprise you at all? Like, did his response surprise you?
It worries me. It worries me greatly that this is his response. Just like last fall, when the first allegations came out that there'd been 11 candidates, $250,000 from the Chinese consulate in Toronto spread to 11 candidates. Now we know the claim is 9 Liberal, 2 Conservatives that they decided to back because these candidates, we don't know their names, were more open to the views of the Chinese Communist Party. We don't know if they won. We don't know if they lost. But that was the claim last fall for the 2019 election. On Friday comes reports citing CSIS documents seen by the Globe and Mail that say it was 2021 as well, and that the goal was to defeat candidates like Kenny Chiu out in Vancouver, Bob Soroya in the Toronto area, and others who were critical of China, supportive of Taiwan, supportive of Hong Kong, but critical of the dictators in Beijing. That they wanted to ensure that the Trudeau Liberals won that election. Justin Trudeau just downplayed that there was any impact at all. The Globe saw the internal documents from CSIS where people are bragging about defeating Conservatives, where they're laying out their plans and how they would do it. And Justin Trudeau just downplays this, but then says he's very concerned about these documents being leaked by CSIS, and he wants to go out, CSIS better look for the whistleblower. That's completely the wrong reaction. Be outraged at the election interference. Trudeau wants to say that it didn't affect the outcome. How do we know that? This task force that he had, the Conservatives raised these issues with the task force. Waleed Solomon, who was Aaron O'Toole's appointee to it, said it was met with a shrug of the shoulders. They did nothing. And so time and again, the Trudeau Liberals just downplay this. Even if it only changed the outcome for one riding, Canadians should know. It doesn't have to mean that the government's going to change, but one riding, somebody gets elected because China decides that person is better than the other one. Well, we should know.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, Brian, another item that slipped under the radar for some on Friday was the release of the federal government's Sustainable Jobs Plan, which is the new name for the Just Transition. So do people in Alberta have a reason to be concerned about this plan?
Oh, absolutely, because it's aimed four square at the oil and gas industry in Western Canada. And it doesn't have a lot of details. It's 32 pages, talks about moving towards a clean energy economy, away from dirty oil and dirty gas. It gives no credence to the fact that liquefied natural gas and natural gas general are cleaner burning fuels. The whole world sees them as a transition fuel, but the Trudeau government doesn't. So there's none of that. It's just about how to move people into clean energy jobs, how to move away from the oil and gas industry, but with no details in the 32 pages. It's worrying federal conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who responded to it saying, well, Vladimir Putin's smiling today because this is the government's plan to wind down Canada's oil and gas industry. Well, that only helps people like Putin and other nefarious countries that have oil and gas. Danielle Smith said she's incredibly worried about what it means for workers in Alberta in the future. I agree with both of them. This is something to be concerned about. The government's been talking about this for a long time. They released their plan, very few details, just that they're moving ahead. Well, when that happens, be worried, be very worried.
Okay, real quick here. The Roxham Road border crossing is in the news again, with Quebec's premier writing to the Trudeau government saying that his province is full. Send them elsewhere, send them away. Of course, he's talking about the illegal border crossing, which saw, nearly 5,000 migrants enter the country in December, and Quebec saying it's overloaded the province's social services. So what are the feds doing about this now?
Well, they're busing them from Quebec to Ontario. Soon they could be going to New Brunswick. Maybe they'll go to other provinces. Legault says send them everywhere but here. What's been happening is for the last little while, Roxham Road's been a big issue for 5 years now, 6 years. But for the last little while, people that come across at the U.S.-Mexico border into Texas, a lot of them are told, hey, do you want a free bus ride to New York City? They arrive in New York City. New York City says, hey, we've got a great deal for you. We're going to send you up to Plattsburgh, New York, and then you can get into Canada. And now those people are being bused from Quebec to Ontario because Quebec says it's full. Meanwhile, the U.S. may finally start paying attention to this issue, Jeanette, because reports have started to come out about a huge increase in people flying from Mexico to Canada and then walking across the border the other way.
Sure.
So
why wouldn't they, right?
The illegal border crossings are happening in all directions. And yes, they are illegal border crossings, whether you're claiming asylum or not. The act of crossing the border is illegal. So all of this is going on. No government is actually responding to it, dealing with it. They're playing a game of hot potato with people's lives. I don't think that's fair to anybody involved in this situation, whether it's people who are in line waiting to immigrate, people who are footing the bill, or the people who are trying to find a better life for themselves. It's not fair to anyone.
Yeah, Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us once again today.
Thank you.
Romantic love is indeed a wonderful thing. However, it seems to have this inevitable tendency to fade over time. So how can we keep the spark alive in our marriage? Well, we're joined today by Dr. Daniel Zapula, pastor of Myth City Church in Lethbridge, founder of the Bridges of Hope humanitarian organization, and author of The All for Nothing Marriage, Why Your Marriage Will Kill You Before Death Do You Part. Dr. Daniel, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to BCN.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, so I love the title of your book. It's very interesting and long. Can you maybe give me a brief explanation of how you came up with it?
Well, the all for nothing, this why your marriage will kill you before death do you part, is based on an idea called primary love. And that is the fact that there's three kinds of love. But primary love is the act of giving yourself to somebody unconditionally. It's a dying to yourself and embracing the self of somebody else and creating a new person. And in that, it's not about me. It's like as Christ did, he died for the church that he loves, so too we die for the home and the marriage that we love. And that is why I said, marriage will kill you before death do you part, because you will die to self and you are yielding to God in Christ in your spouse.
interesting. So these days, there are a lot of different opinions on what marriage is all about, but you're a pastor, of course. So can you give us a working definition of biblical marriage?
Yeah, I think that indeed there's so many definitions of marriage out there. But for me, I found that the most helpful one is to think of marriage as a sacred place. You know, the sense that your life is sacred, my life is sacred. And being together, we create a place, a space that is sacred. And sacred spaces, it means that even God, the divine, invade that place. It's a place that is safe and sacred, apart from all other. And not only that, it's a blame-free zone where our commitment is not to be in the blaming zone, because it's very easy to blame. There's no blame. And it's a place that is sacred and safe where you can give yourself completely and unconditionally to another person in the presence of God.
I like that. You know, when people first get married, there's a lot of fire and passion, right? But is it unrealistic to expect that to continue at the same level years down the road?
Yeah, that's a great question, because sometimes I think it has been helpful for many people to think about three kind of loves. One, they call it eros, which is a love in between lovers, and then they talk about philia as companionship and general friendship. But they think about agape as the giving of yourself away freely and unconditionally, irrespective of the person, whether the person deserves it or not. Problem is, today in today's society, I will love you when you love me. It's conditioned. And in the all for nothing marriage, we are recommending that the kind of love that is closer to a biblical definition of marriage and love is unconditional surrender and gift of self. Unconditional. And it's a gift because I give myself freely. I think consciously, not because I cannot, but I offer myself. And I say to my wife, here I am, have me, I'm here for you. There is no condition attached to my gift. Because we believe that anytime you attach any condition to your gift, it's not love. It's a giving of yourself, not agape love. Agape love, you give fully, no condition attached to it.
I would imagine you've learned a lot of these lessons over time as you've been married. You probably didn't come into marriage knowing all of this, or did you?
No, I didn't know anything. I didn't have a clue. That's why my marriage killed me. Because I came in this marriage with a sense of compatibility. You got to find the right mate. You got to find the right wife or the right husband. And everybody in our churches, and we want to seek the right partner. We don't want to make a mistake. And they give us the character, the competency. That person needs to have a high character, high moral. They need to be competency. They need to be, they have to be compatibility, which is a myth. I got married and I realized, well, I am in a multiracial, multicultural kind of marriage, and I realized, wow, the fact that I'm from Africa and my wife is from here is not really what determined the quality, whether it is the quality and the quantity and our experience of marriage. It was the person I brought. And I realized in order to go forward into our destiny as one, I needed to die to myself. And that is why I began to really explore what the Bible have to say about marriage, what the Bible have to say about love. And it profoundly transformed me in my marriage. And I believe that understanding alone can change and profoundly transform the way we do life. And if we have time, I can tell you a story from the Bible about why this have become important to us.
Oh, yeah.
It's Genesis 29. It's a story about a man named Jacob. It's interesting that the name Jacob means deceiver. And Jacob had deceived his brother Esau, and he's running away to hide. And as he's running, he decided to go to Laban, his uncle. And he goes there, he has an encounter with God. And then he ended up in his uncle's house. And he fell in love with Rachel. Love. And the Bible described Rachel again, in that literature as curved in all sides, all the right place. She was beautiful. She was wonderful. She was, wow, every eyebrow was raised around her. So he told his uncle, I want to marry her. Give me Rachel for my wife. He fell in love deeply. And then his uncle said, no problem, no problem. You worked for me 7 years, and I'm going to give you Rachel. If you remember the story, he worked so hard, and the Bible said 7 years seemed to be like 7 days. And on the day of the wedding, something happened. After the feast, the celebration, he goes to bed. His wife is brought to him. So he goes to bed. He made love to her. And the Bible says when he wake up in the morning, he looked, and it was not Rachel. It was Leah. It was Leah.
It was the sister.
Rachel's older sister.
Yeah.
And Jacob is shocked. And he goes to his uncle. He said, why have you Jacobed me? Why have you deceived me? I work for Rachel. Why did you give me Leah? And then his uncle said, well, because she's older. That's our custom. And here's what he did. He said, if you finish your honeymoon with Leah, I'm going to give you Rachel too. It's a bizarre story. So he finished his honeymoon with Leah, and then he's given Rachel for 7 more years. He worked and worked for 7 more years. But here's the point that the story is trying to tell. And so the story is this. Even Jacob was in love with Rachel, but in order to get the woman of his love, he needed to embrace the women of his fate. Now, here it is. In order to get to Rachel, you need to marry Leah. And the point being made is that every choice that we make, we need to live with its unintended consequences, right? If you choose Rachel, you will have to marry Leah. And I think for many of us in marriage, we have really got our Rachel. Our problem is that we never seem to be at peace with Leah, which is the unintended consequences of our choice and decision. And if you read the Bible, interesting enough, it is Leah that will end up being the great-great-grandmother of Jesus Christ.
Right. You know, it's so interesting. I want to get back to your book for a second here, because in your book, you do say that the key to a phenomenal marriage is something called primary love, right? So you can maybe tell us about that a little bit, and also when the romantic sparks have faded and marriage becomes mundane or worse, sometimes you'll hear people say, you know, we just weren't that compatible. So what's your response to that specifically?
Yes, and that's what I mean, like in the story. Primary love is that giving away of yourself to somebody. You know, it's that surrendering. It's a dying to yourself and giving yourself away to somebody, irrespective of the fact whether they deserve it or not. You see, we have this culture in which we know, yeah, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. In primary love, I'll scratch your back even if you don't scratch mine. You know, no greater love has there been that a man should die and give his life and surrender it for his own. And in primary love, I am really trying to explain how in marriage, in Christian understanding of marriage, we need to die to self and to embrace the mystery and the sacred space, the sacred place that somebody else is, embracing them unconditionally. I talk about compatibility and the sense that really we tend to say, well, it's a Christian teaching. You need to get married. You need to pick somebody. There's only one person that God has for you there, and that person need to be compatible to you. That means you need to have the same thinking, same feelings, same preferences. But in my book, I defend that actually compatibility is a myth, because what you like, me, what I like, it changes over time.
I was just going to say that. You might find somebody that's compatible with you today, but like 15 years from now, I mean, it's possible. People change. People change all the time.
And that's right. And that's why the compatibility myth is a myth. it says that, but the only thing that doesn't change, it's my unconditional love, my unconditional giving of myself to my spouse, whether it is cold or hot, whether everything feels good or terrible. My gift is unconditional. Just think about it for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to compatibility or lack of compatibility, I think that we all tend to point the fingers, when things aren't going smoothly, or to place blame on the spouse. So you write about the 100 to none principle. What is that?
Yeah, because and again, just to finish about the compatibility, it is, again, when people blame compatibility for problem in their marriage, it's a myth. Marriage, I've seen most marriages have one problem. They have a connection problem, not a compatibility problem. When I don't connect to somebody, when you're not connected to somebody, everything else falls apart. Your connection is what makes a marriage. That is very, very important. I want your listener to just have that kind of understanding. When connection is there, we have an incredible marriage. The 100% to none is this. It's based on this principle. When people get married, I meet them for premarital counseling. And one of the things that I ask them, I say, marriage is a 50-50% proposition. You give 50%, I give 50%. And I say, wow, it's not neat. So now, when your wife gets pregnant, what is 50%? What does that mean? And people say, wow, I never thought about that. Well, I say, what happens if your spouse is ill? They become incapacitated. Like how do you do 50-50? And then they say, I never thought about that. And then it occurs to them that, wow, we cannot operate on a 50% proposition. I believe the divorce rate in our country, the problem we encounter in marriage in our country is because we have based it on the 50-50 proposition. And I suggest that marriage is not a 50-50 proposition. It's 100% to none. I give you 100%. I give you all that I am. You get to choose to give. But my love to you, my being here, is a gift to you unconditional. Now that's a whole different way of thinking. And that means I don't expect anything. I receive what you give, but I can control my gift. I give myself without condition.
Great message. Thank you so much for being with us today, Daniel. Dr. Daniel Zapula is the author of The All for Nothing Marriage. I'm Jeanette Roche. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks so much for watching.